Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good. We're going to talk about another boondoggle. Can you believe our government has given us another boondoggle? Of course, when we wrote up the title there, we put a question mark there, but, you know, that's a little bit misleading because I doubt if there's anybody in our audience that would say, no, I think it's going to be a boondoggle. And we've talked about boondoggles, and we've talked about the waste in the Pentagon. But this one, you know, if it stays alive for long enough time, maybe it'll spend more money on the F-35. But they're spending more money on this aircraft carrier with one unit. Of course, they have this one unit they've been working on, and it's $13 billion. And I want to know, I want you to give me a clear-cut answer. Do you feel a lot safer now that we have this aircraft carrier just about to be launched to keep us safe and secure from all enemies?
Well, the USS Gerald Ford is the first of a new Ford class of carriers taking over for the Nimitz class, which I think were commissioned in the mid-'70s. And it's supposed to have a lot of technical improvements, a lot of special gadgets. But there is some bad news in addition to the good news. 2 years late for delivery, $2.9 billion over budget. According to Michael Gilmore, who's the DoD's Director of Operational Testing, it's not fit for combat. So it's a nice, shiny, gold-plated, big floaty boat that is not very helpful.
You know, they don't do a very good job of hiding their war propaganda at precise times during a fiscal year. You know, we're in great danger. The Chinese are going to get us and destroy our vessels and our Navy in the South China Sea. And, of course, we have to worry about the Russians. Now we have to worry about the Russians and the Chinese getting together. So it's always to stimulate and get people to go along with the spending more money. But the whole thing is this provides nothing for us. It's just part of the military-industrial complex, because this is, even if it worked like they claim it was going to work, it would be you know, a useless weapon, because I've been told many years ago, 20, 30 years ago, that aircraft carriers are ancient. They can be destroyed rather easily by opponents that are relatively primitive in their ability to take on a giant, you know, military like ours. So it doesn't even provide that. So it makes me wonder why they go through this, you know, this process. I wonder if they admit to themselves in their own mind, well, you know, we got to do this to get this $1 trillion budget passed this year, or whether they rationalize and say that, yeah, you know, we really need this. We need to do a better job.
Yeah, well, technologies come and they're attractive. You know, our old friend Chuck Spinney, who spent a lot of time in the Pentagon, we talked about him the other day. You know, he's written a lot about how acquisition works in the military and the attraction of extremely expensive high-tech weaponry. And one of the reasons it's very attractive is because you can spread the jobs and you can spread the spending out among many states. And of course, when you have a factory in your district, your congressional district, you're not as likely to vote against this particular weapon system. So they build all of this into it. It's very attractive. And then when it doesn't work, you know, can you imagine if we overbalanced we misbalanced our checkbook by a couple of $1 billion,
yeah,
you know?
They might come after it. But, you know, the way I look at it and look back at the people I worked with in the Congress, and I've always tried to give them the benefit of the doubt, which sometimes they didn't deserve. But they, I think some of them actually thought or are influenced by it. We need it for national defense. But overall, people in Washington, especially members of Congress, are influenced by politics. So they're not saying, you know, this is risky because I know my people in my district, they don't want this. And this is a sign of weakness and we can't afford it. But I am going to, you know, bite the bullet and risk my political career and vote for this. I don't think that is the case. I don't think they think deeply sometimes. And I think it's more like, I wonder what my district thinks. And maybe they're going to build part of this thing. And but I think the other overriding thing, which has been used against me, is that if you don't support everything the military does, including supporting the illegal wars, that for some reason you don't care about the personnel involved, you don't care about America's security, you're not a patriotic American. And I think that is, what motivates a lot of them. And a lot of them, the really, really good fiscal conservatives, never consider the fact that they should, consider voting against some of this militarism, no matter what they read about this. I've never in detail interviewed and asked them, this stuff doesn't work. Why do you vote for it? But I think it's political pressure and it's consensus and not a full discussion. There's a lot of them that if they're not on that particular committee, it's just pretty superficial, and then they go along and vote for the military budget. And all the hard work of getting this stuff put in is done behind the scenes and with staff people, and they get started and they have these hearings, and all of a sudden the thing gets motivated. I don't know. Did you come across how many years they may have been working on this? It's been quite a few years.
Well, construction on this particular aircraft carrier began in 2008. So it's been 8 years. It's already 2 years late, and it probably won't be delivered or commissioned until next year. So it's quite behind.
Yeah. And then we more or less have dealt with the propaganda, the war propaganda, because when you think of some of the conversations we've had about the South China Sea, this is, we may be in warfare for freedom of the seas once again, and we have to be ready for the Chinese, and they've talked about that. And I imagine a lot of Americans would be influenced by that. But the message they don't get is the one that you just delivered. These things don't work, whether it's the F-35 or an aircraft carrier. It doesn't serve the purpose even if they thought that it was justified.
And this is really the area that I remember. This is the area that I would say where the deep state is strongest, and that's in the military budget. And I remember going to briefings before we had a big DOD appropriations bill or something, and the briefers would all be permanent staff, committee staff members. They worked on this their whole lives. Their whole lives and their future after being in Congress was all reliant on them being involved in ginning up support for these different weapon systems. You spend 20 or 30 years as a part of the deep state in the congressional world, and then you retire and go and you work for a military contractor, double, quadruple your salary. So these are the people that nobody questions because nobody really sees them.
And then there's a collusion between the congressional oversight and also the Pentagon, because how about the report we talked about, $8 trillion wasn't literally stolen, although I think some of this is stolen in the sense that it goes in the pockets of the military, military machine, the people who build these things. But they just let it go. It doesn't bother them one bit. They just keep spending this money.
Yeah, there's no oversight, and the money disappears. We can't account for $8 trillion. Oh well, too bad.
Yeah, $8 trillion. Pretty soon will add up to a lot of a little bit of money or something. But that is to me a shame because once again there is not a thorough audit, and so I think there could very well be a collusion. It's a little bit more than just sloppiness. I mean, they in spite of how big of operation Social Security is, they know that politically speaking, the checks go out or your electronic goes out, so they can handle a lot of information, but not at the Pentagon. For some reason, it's a little bit confusing, and nobody is ever penalized, and it seems that it serves the interest of the lobbyists, the interest of those staff people who work on it for years, and serves the interest of the Pentagon.
And the propaganda pushes the idea to the American people that it keeps them safe, which is untrue, the opposite. We were both attracted to a piece we saw on Zero Hedge this morning that outlined the policy side, and they were somewhat unrelated because we were talking about the specific class of carrier, but also on the policy side. And the two of them go together so much. But the thing that struck me is the point that they made in the Zero Hedge article is essentially with the failure of central banks comes war. The central banks lose their tools. We saw this last week, the Jackson Hole. They lose their ability to manipulate things. It goes flaccid. and then the next step is war, and that's what I think is most terrifying right now.
Yeah, and that's the big question, because I've always said this is all going to come to an end. The Fed's going to come to an end, but it won't be gradual. But they even suggested maybe the American people are waking up and maybe they'll complain about this. That it's not likely to happen, but the collusion of big banking and central banking and the creation of fiat money to pay these bills, eventually it's going to come to an end. And the example I've used so often is, the Soviet system. The Soviets had a lot of weapons, but we had to talk about the threat and really milk the benefits to certain individuals throughout the Cold War. But it's something that I think is going to continue until the whole system falls apart. But let's hope there's more people now challenging the policy. Of course, we hear from them, and sometimes we think that there's a bunch of them out there are starting to question these things. And I think there are, more and more people questioning this. And I've often thought in campaigning and all that when I said things that were very, very controversial, that it didn't get me into more trouble. But it was the fact that a lot of people are thinking along those lines, but they don't hear it, and then the political damage isn't nearly as great, because I took a lot of those positions, and it never seemed to hurt me in my district, even though it might involve not voting for some of the benefits, so-called benefits, to the district. Although the bigger picture, I tried to make the point that you make on the military. It doesn't help our national security. And this hope they wake up on this. But I think that there's so much going on. And I think in that article, they also talked about really pushing and painting the picture that China and Russia are like this. And I think they work together better now on economics, which is fine and dandy. But I just don't think they're conspiring, to put a dual navy in the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, we have our navy all, in the waters next to China, as well as the waters next to Iran and Russia and all these things. But I don't think even though they morally could justify, well, you're doing it to us, we're going to put our Navy in the Gulf of Mexico. I don't think they're planning that. But the people have to believe that could be happening. Otherwise, they wouldn't get this huge ship to protect us, and talk people into wasting that money.
But, the thing is, if we're afraid of a Russia-China alliance, why does it seem like every single policy out of Washington pushes the two of them together? It's almost as if they want them to get together to form an alliance so they can justify even more, $2 trillion next year, $4 trillion the year after. And you notice in every place where the U.S. is heavily intervening, you do see this kind of push of China and Russia getting together, sometimes India, Iran. But I noticed a couple of days ago that China, it was not a big story, but I think it's a significant story, that China is going to start training some of the Syrian military. And that's something very, very different. It'll be the medical corps and that sort of thing. But this is a big shift for China to come over and start doing things like this. And
the other point that's made is that we more or less play nuclear chicken. We threaten here and they threaten, and we have this and that. And that, of course, we promote that because that stirs up fear, and then people will go along with these budgets. But it's also very dangerous, too, because even though the intent isn't to start World War III, if things get out of hand, if it's tit for tat, eventually there could be some accident. And even though maybe the American people are waking up and wanting our governments to back off on this, and why are we in nation building, all these things. But all we have to do is have one plane shot down or one ship blown up or something like that, and the people, just are ready to go to town and do whatever the leader tells us to do. We're on war footing now, and we'll have to fight them because they just shot down this airplane, and that scares me too. And sometimes we should be concerned about false flags too. There could be accidents, unintended consequences. but sometimes it might be in somebody's interest to start it. You know, even though the two countries may be going back and forth, and we might not be looking for a hot war, somebody else might think they'll benefit from it, and sort of do something and blame it on somebody else. That's been known to happen in history.
I think that's what motivates us to work twice as hard or 4 times as hard on the projects of the Institute for Peace and Prosperity. We are so outspent, so outgunned. I mean, probably a decent luncheon at one of the other big institutes would be our whole year's budget. But we have to do what we can to try to get the word out that it doesn't have to be this way.
Well, we've had this pleasant surprise that a lot more people expressed an interest in coming to Washington in September for our conference, and we were both surprised and pleased because we sort of prepare. Well, we know where we are. We have a lot of work to do, but it looks like our turnout is going to be 2 or 3 times bigger than we ever anticipated. And the need is going to be there, and that's the one thing that we have to be aware of, is that if they're not going to get this message from the university professors, from the newspapers that barely exist, from the TV and all, they have to get information, and that is what is available to us. Now there are communications that are available to us and others. And if we're on the side of peace and prosperity and the people care and they begin to give up, and I claim we live in a unique age because government is the enemy right now. 70% of the American people, they don't trust the government and they mess up everything, and we have to just prepare them for, the propaganda that's going to try and scare them either economically or politically and militarily into saying, well, whatever is necessary, you have to take care of us because it's your job to make me safe forever and ever, so I will give up my liberties. And I heard that statement too often over the last 15 years, the people who want all this and want more, surveillance of the people. Well, if it makes me safe, I'm willing to give this up. Well, there's a lot of people who won't go along with that, and that, of course, is the group that we're appealing to. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.